So now, back to John Beekers again. And before you start, I would advise that you revise the control accounts studied before. Now, let's have a look at the example. John Beekers requested further assistance in calculating the following for the year ended July 2018. He wanted credit purchases, total purchases. He provided you with the following information. The balance of the creditors at the beginning of the year was 8,500 and at the end of the year was 11,200. And the additional information for the year ending 31 July is as follows. Cash purchases during the year was 12,600. EFT payments to creditors was 22,900. EFT stands for Electronic Fund Transfer. Discount received from creditors for prompt payments was 1,200. Interest added on overdue account by creditors was 350. Now let's first enter our opening balance of 8,500 in our creditors control account. There we are, 8,500 on the credit side of our creditors control account. Now let's move on to our additional information. Number 1 reads as follows. Cash purchases during the year was 12,600. But now this is cash purchases. So cash purchases will not come in our creditors control account because the two accounts involved here are cash and purchases. And anything that has to do with cash will come in the cash book. So we will exclude number 1 in our creditors control account. If there is no cash purchases, then we assume cash purchases to be 0. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 says EFT payments, electronic fund transfer payments to creditors, 22,900. This is when John Beekers transfers money through the bank to his creditors. Please note that EFT payments or payments to creditors is not to be confused with cash purchases, because cash purchases is when John Beekers purchases items with cash, and payments to creditors is when he is paying off his account, as in number 2. Now let's enter that into our control account. That will come on the debit side of our creditors control account because our creditors balance is decreasing and our creditors control account is a liability and our liabilities decrease on the debit side. Let's move on to number 3. Discount received from creditors for prompt payments was 1,200. Well, this is another item that would decrease our creditors control account. Discount received is on the debit side because it's also reducing our creditors. Let's have a look at number 4. Interest added on overdue account by creditors, 350. Well, if we don't pay our account in time, our creditor has the right to add interest. So this would increase the amount we owe our creditors, so we would enter this in our credit side of the control account. Now let's have a look at our ending balance. Our ending balance is 11,200. We would enter that on the debit side because we will carry that over to the credit side of the new financial year, and in the new financial year our creditors control account will start with a credit balance. Now we are looking for our credit purchases, and our credit purchases will be our balancing figure. So now we need to add up the totals, and in this case the total on the debit side will be larger than the total on the credit side. So the total on the debit side is 35,300, and if we would subtract the 8,500 and the 350 from that amount, we will get our credit purchases, which is 26,450. So our credit purchases will be 26,450. And now for B, we need to find our total purchases. Now our total purchases is credit purchases plus cash purchases. Total purchases is 39,050. So remember, our purchases will be our balancing figure. So we first need to enter all the information that we have, and after we've done that, we will be able to calculate our purchases. Now let's have a look at another example. This time we need to find credit sales. In our example, Mr. John Beekers again requested further assistance in calculating the following for the year ended 31 July 2018. Credit sales and total sales. And he provided us with the following. The balances for our debtors at the beginning of the year was 12,000, at the end of the year was 17,500. The additional information for the year ending 31 July 2018 were as follows. Cash sales during the year was 20,400. Cash and debit card receipts from debtors amounted to 42,000. Sales returns during the year was 2,400. Interest added on the overdue of credit customers was 540, and accounts written off was 1,200. Now let's add all of this information in our debtors control account. As usual, we will start with our opening balance. Our opening balance will come on the debit side of our debtors control account, since our debtors control account is an asset and our assets increase on the debit side. Let's have a look at number 1. At number 1 we have cash sales during the year, which is 20,400. But remember, cash sales is not included in our debtors control account. The two accounts involved here is cash and sales, not debtors. And if we have cash, we should record this in the cash book and not in our debtors control account. Again, if there are no cash sales given at the beginning of the financial year, we assume that to be 0. Let's move on to number 2. Cash and debit card receipts from debtors amounted to 42,000 Namibian dollars. This is when our debtors are paying their accounts either by cash or by debit card into the bank of John Beekers. This means that when the debtors pay their account decreases. And since our debtors balance is decreasing, we need to enter that on the credit side. So we will enter bank 42,000 on the credit side. Let's move on to number 3. Sales returns during the year was 2,400. This is also decreasing the balance of our debtors because our debtors are returning goods and therefore their account will decrease. So we'll also need to enter this on the credit side. So we would also credit our sales returns. Let's have a look at number 4. Interest added on overdue of credit customers. This means that we charged our customers interest, which increases their account, so we would debit this transaction. Interest received on the debit side. Number 5 says accounts written off 1,200. If you can remember, this is bad debts. Bad debts decreases the balance of our debtors, so we would enter this on the credit side. Let's go and do that. Bad debts 1,200. And then we need to enter our ending balance, which is 17,500. We will enter this on the credit side because we will bring this balance down the next financial year on the debit side. And then just like we did in our creditors control account, we would check which side, the debit or the credit side, is the highest, and we'll use that as our total. In this case, the credit side is the highest, which is 63,100. And then after that, we will subtract from the debit side to get our credit sales. So our credit sales is 50,560. So we've solved for A, our credit sales. Now we need to solve for B, which is our total sales. And total sales is credit sales plus cash sales. So we need to add our 50,560 with our 20,400, which is our cash sales, which will give us our total sales of 70,960. And remember, when calculating our credit sales in our debtors control account, our credit sales will always be our balancing figure. So first you need to enter all the information you have and then calculate your credit sales.